Well, here at Get Ready to Rock, we're saying hello to a legend. We've caught up with you finally, Steve Cropper. Hello to you.
Cheers.
And it's great to see you, really.
Glad to be here.
Now, tell us, how did you get into the music scene? How did your interest in soul music, particularly, and R&B develop? Was it the fact you were in Memphis?
Well, that was it basically. I was actually raised on a farm in Missouri. I'd never heard gospel music or R&B or anything close to it. You know, probably the closest thing I ever heard was Peggy Lee or something. Interesting, different band. And when I got to Memphis, I was 10, I guess. And the first time I listened to radio, there was a gospel station on. And I just fell in love with gospel music. So that's the roots of it. And then growing up as a kid in high school, we started out playing the rock and roll stuff, you know, some Elvis hits and different people. And we found out that what we really enjoyed was the more happy dance music and seeing people dance. And so we kind of grew up in school. We went to a school called Messick, and all those people loved to dance. I mean, that was the era of I guess the sock hops and stuff. And they called them sock hops for gymnasium floors. They didn't want the kids scuffing up their wooden hardwood floors and that lacquer, so you'd have to take your shoes off. A buddy of ours thought that Charlie Freeman and I, we just played together, were pretty good, and he said, "I've got a friend who's a disc jockey. You know, I want you guys to play for him." So we went down to the station when he was on. And he was in his booth, you know, with the turntables doing a disc jockey. He said, "You guys just go out there and set up," and had a little studio about the size of this room we're in right now, and just set up. And he said, "I'll point to you when I'm ready for you, and you guys play me something," you know. So, okay. So we did, and he gave us a cue, and we played a song. I don't even remember what the song was. I should, but I don't really remember what it was. And he said, "Can you do another one?" I said, "Yeah, we'll do another one." And what we didn't know is that he flipped the switch and put us out on the air. And a bunch of people called in and said, "Who are those guys? Man, they're really good." So he says, "Well, is this just the two of you? Do you have a band?" We said, "No." And he said, "Well, if you had a drummer, I'd put you on one of my sock hops." So we went searching everywhere for a drummer. And we found one. I guess we were just in the 11th grade. And which would have made us just about 16. We started with 14. And we found a drummer in the 9th grade. Now that's sort of, if you're a junior, you don't hang out and fraternize with 9th graders, you know. But this guy says, I play drums, and he said, "My father's in a country band, and they rehearse on whatever nights," and he said, "You guys can come over Saturday." We got a den, and so we did that and worked up some songs and played. A guy's name was Keith Sheriff, was the disc jockey, and he put us on sock hop, and the rest of it went from there. So then we grew the band into what became later the Marquees, we hit last night, and we added the drummer, and then we added the bass player, which turned out to be Donald Huck Dunn, and then we added a couple of horns and got a better singer. I was singing, and they said, "This ain't gonna make it." So we got a really good singer. Ronnie Stutes was our singer. Went by the name of Ronnie Angel, and that's what it progressed into. The other fact was that when we added the horns, Charles Packy Axton, came to me and he said, "I hear you got a good band." And I said, "Well, thank you." You know, he said, "Well, I'd like to be in your band." And I said, "Well, what do you do?" He said, "I play saxophone." I said, "Well, we're not really looking for horns." And I swear, I said, "How long have you been playing?" He said, "Oh, I've been taking lessons for 3 months." And he said that his uncle had a recording studio, which is not really, that's a little blown out of proportion. He has some recording equipment in his garage, and he'd been recording some stuff, you know. And I went, "Wow." Well, come to find out, his mom, Estelle Axton, always wanted to have a record shop. So as the story goes, you know, the history of Stax Records, which stands for Stuart Axton, Jim Stewart and Estelle Axton, his sister, he wanted to borrow money so he could get this building, a lease on a building to build a studio. And she said, "Well, Jim, I'll lend you the money if you'll let me have a record shop." And that's how it all got started. And I don't think Jim could speak for himself, but I don't think he thought that his nephew's band would ever amount to anything, especially Steve Cropper. So it's, and it really didn't when you think of it that way, but when we married ourselves or added some really seasoned, good session musicians, and that's when they came up with the record last night.
So where did the soul music and the R&B, was that very much part of the local scene really?
I think it was, and when people ask me the influence of music, yes, it was R&B, yes, it was gospel, but we grew up with Hank Ballard and the Midnighters, Bo Diddley, that kind of thing, and Chuck Berry too. Chuck Berry was R&B, but a little more rock and roll R&B. And so we kind of just got ourselves we started dropping a lot of those rock and roll pop songs that we did in our show and added more rhythm and blues songs. And when we got into playing Ray Charles later and James Brown, and we were the hottest thing going in Memphis, Tennessee, because nobody else played that kind of music. So we worked all the time. We were working 6 or 7 days a week. The era that happened before us, was sort of rock and roll rhythm and blues influenced, but it was all kind of slick and Hollywoodish kind of stuff, And a lot of hits came out of that era, but a lot of good dance hits came out of that era. But when we moved it into R&B, I don't know, it just became something that was bigger than life. The success of the song Last Night with the Marquis, when I look back on it now, I said, I was wondering, why was that, other than the fact it was a good piece of music, why was that such a hit? It was the first twist instrumental that didn't have lyrics on it, that you could do the dance and twist to. And that's what worked. And I remember seeing my mom in the living room twisted to it and all that. And something that got my attention and sort of disturbed me in a way, I never read tweets and stuff like that, but some guy sent a tweet and he said, well, what's with a guy that leaves his band in the middle of a tour when they're all counting on him and all that? I'm going, I didn't do that, but I did leave him. I left him in the 3rd week of the end of a tour. We'd already been everywhere else, And so I told Packy, who had been wanting to be really the band leader, you could just see the influence and the politics of that. He wanted to be the band leader. So we took a break one night and we were down in Bossier City at the Horseshoe Lounge, I think it was called, the Horseshoe Bar. And I said, Packy, I said, you've been wanting to be leader of this band for a long time. And I said, it's yours. He said, what are you talking about? I said, I'm headed to Memphis tomorrow. I'm going to go back to school and I'm going to call your mom and see if I can get my job back. So that's what I did. And it's a good thing I did, because that, kept Booker T and the MGs and got them together. And it was just a happening of guys. When we started touring a little bit with the hit Green Onions with Booker T, and there I was, the only white guy in the band, it got a little, weird in certain places in the South. And we would play for some of these colleges, and when we would go to check into a hotel downtown, they go, oh, no, we can't do that. We go, why? So we'd wind up having to drive, on the edge of town at a motel somewhere. They just wanted the business, and they didn't look at color either. They just wanted the money, wanted the business. So I don't know why they had that policy, and I look back in history and I go, man, was all that going on? I guess it was. They were making people aware of some of the real atrocities that were happening. So.
But you were very much focused on the music.
I was focused on the music. I'm not even sure I could have helped if I had been aware of it. You know what I'm saying? I don't. It would probably give me a different outlook on life.
Yes.
And in the later years, working with Eddie Floyd, William Bell, Rufus, Otis, they'd come to my house, hang out. And it was just, that was a way of life.
1966, the Stax house band, I don't know whether you would have classed, were you still in the house band in 1966? Yeah. Because I think it was unusual that they were put on a weekly wage. That was unusual because the label had been going for a few years. They must have realised that they had to retain these guys,
Well, several people on draw, and they were putting songwriters on draw. When Isaac Hayes first came there, they put him on a draw. A draw is that you get paid each week, and if you are successful and make a royalty. See, all those guys, we had a production group of 6 guys that were paid or had a royalty on the records. That was our payback for playing on it. a very nice thing for Jim Stewart to do. I don't know anybody else
See, that's
in
unusual, isn't it?
the industry that ever did that to a band. They want to know, why that band was so great. Well, that was keeping the good guys around all the time and having the same guys on the same sessions all the time. And other studios in Memphis did the same thing. American had a band. Willie Mitchell at High had the same guys on all those things. Played on several different artists. It was also fun as a musician to be playing Albert King one day and Otis Redding the next, or William Bell, or Eddie Floyd, and we all I don't think it was by accident, but we kept our mind in the fact that we had to make each artist sound a little bit different. They obviously sounded different vocally, but we had to keep the music a little bit different too. You didn't want Rufus singing on an Albert King track, and we didn't do that. And,
so that kept you on
kind
your
of gave
toes,
everybody
really.
their own little ID.
Yeah.
Otis records sound like Otis. They didn't sound like William Bell or Eddie Floyd. You know what I'm saying?
Yes. Yeah. But that in itself was quite a challenge, wasn't it? Really.
A bit.
Yeah.
But I think without actually designing it or sitting down talking about it, that's what I was trying to say. Is everybody had that inner feeling about it. They knew it had to be that way.
Instinctive.
But we didn't design it that way.
No.
Yeah.
Great times. Again, in the 60s, you were like A&R man, weren't you, for Stax? And
yeah, I got the dirty work.
now, did you get a little bit frustrated with that it took you away from playing rhythm guitar? You're more of an admin man, really, I suppose.
Well, I mean,
office man.
My style was just created by accident in a have-to situation, because the way I look at it was that I had to be two guys because they couldn't afford two guitar players. They just didn't have the money to pay the session for an extra guy. So I'd play rhythm, and then I'd play a lick, or we call them fills, and then back to rhythm, and then fills. That's just a style I developed, and so there was no need to ever have more than one guitar player on most of those early hits. So that's what I did, and it was all accidental. I didn't sit down with a pencil and piece of paper and say, "Oh, I'm going to play this tomorrow." All of that stuff just fell out of the ceiling, and we did it.
Yeah,
and it was
spontaneous.
fun.
Right?
Yeah, there I was in California in the '70s. Now Tom Dowd worked with Rod Stewart. That was my connection with Rod. We became friends. I played on several records. It was kind of funny to me that there I was, the guy who played on all that Stax stuff. And people hired me because they knew that I played on that Stax stuff. But I wasn't hired to play on R&B records. Don't know why. That's just part of history. Everything was more pop stuff. But they wanted the R&B influence in the pop records. They wanted the dance.
Are you talking now about back in the 70s, 80s?
You mentioned the 70s.
Yeah.
And that was really after I left. When I first left Stax, which would be September of 1970, Ronnie and I produced and did recorded Tower Power, the Bump City record. A lot of people don't know that. Jeff Beck, the band Dreams out of New York with the Becker brothers, those kind of things. And we had a ball making those records. They were big records, They weren't just fly by overnight wannabes. They were real deal.
That's it.
So I did a lot of that, and then I finally got, I don't know, just a little bit frustrated with where I saw music going. The writing ability wasn't there anymore, and I was, still coming down from Otis Redding and all that. It just was not fun. You mentioned Wilson Pickett earlier. It was Jim Stewart's decision, as far as I know, and he just come in one day and we had a meeting, and he said, "No more outside recording." What does that mean? Well, you can't record anybody's not on the label, signed to the label. You mean I'm in my third hit with Wilson Pickett and I'm not going to be able to work with him anymore? Well, that's exactly what it means. And that's a big pill to swallow. And I think Booker also felt the same way, because he had been offered to do a lot of stuff, and we were supposed to record Simon and Garfunkel and a bunch of other stuff, and it just didn't get to do it. And so Booker just said, "Hey, I'm going to move to California and start doing my own thing." So he did. I kind of look at it maybe as a good chef. If you're used to making something that everybody knows is really, really good, and they take all your ingredients away and you can't have those spices or ingredients anymore, it's not going to come out the same. It may be a lot of likeness to it, but it's not going to be the same thing. So with the loss of Booker, the loss of Al not being there, I mean, there was so much, when people ask me, what would I think? What would Steve Cropper think was the downfall of Stax? I think it was the workload. Because they wanted us, industry-wise, to become an album company like all the other companies rather than a singles company. So when we had time to work on singles and our concentration, our efforts were to get the hit single, and we put out an album of just some songs and let the singer do some cover tunes, you know what I mean? Or some throwaway things that weren't all that great. So from that standpoint, I don't think we made the best of albums, but when we started concentrating, I was working, producing, let's say 4 artists. Well, that's at least 40 songs instead of 2 or 3. It's just, that was it. And they broke us all up to where Booker was responsible for this group of musicians or artists, and I was for this group, and Duck and Al, and so we couldn't always be together all the time. I said, man, I got a session tomorrow. So, well, I can't, I'm gonna be able to do that. I'm working with so-and-so. So we all kind of knew. And some things did leak through when we got together and played. A big one was Who's Making Love. And that was a lot of fun.
You had a bit of like a career boost really with the Blues Brothers, didn't you? And you still go out touring.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
They kind of knew what they wanted to do, and Duck and I sort of looked at it, and I think Duck saw it first because I came in 3 days later, and he said, man, you gotta go talk to these guys. They're doing a bunch of old songs, and I don't think they're gonna, So my suggestion was, why don't you guys, looking at John, why don't you guys do something where you can dance? And they said, like what? I said, like Sam and Dave. And they said, well, what would you suggest? And I looked at Paul Schaefer, and I said, you remember Soul Man, don't you? He said, yeah. So Duck and I hit Soul Man, and we played Soul Man, and they danced and had fun. And John looked at me and he said, man, that's great. This got a lot of energy. But he said, it's too high. I keep shaking up there. So I just dropped it down to where we've been doing it forever. And it was a big hit for us. So basically, the way I look at that is that Doug Dunn and I got to relive our careers all over again, just by doing the same thing we'd always done.
Yes.
We didn't change anything.
But hugely enjoyable.
We'd play with some different musicians, but we didn't change. And then the nucleus of the Blues Brothers band, we had already been touring with Levon Helm 2 albums in 2 years.
Yeah.
And Belushi heard us at the Palladium one night on a New Year's Eve show, and he said, I want that band. So that's probably the real influence.
Yeah.
We wouldn't have been in that band had Belushi not seen us and said, I want those guys.
Yeah, the authentic thing.